It was a calm morning in a small neighborhood, with the sun just beginning to rise and birds quietly chirping. The streets were mostly empty, and the few people outside were going about their routines. Among them was a woman who had lived there all her life. She had plans for the day, a few errands to run, and nothing in the world to suggest that her morning would turn into a nightmare. She walked steadily, holding her bag close, taking in the familiar sights of her neighborhood, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The quiet was broken by the sound of a car engine approaching. A police car drove slowly down the street. The officer inside had a reputation that the community had heard whispers about, but never fully confronted. There were stories of him being aggressive, of showing bias in small ways, but nothing had escalated to this point. He saw the woman on the sidewalk and decided to pull over. The reason seemed unclear, even to him at first, but he was driven by a sense of authority that had become too comfortable, too unquestioned. The woman noticed the police car stopping nearby. She instinctively felt a little tense but tried to remain calm. She had done nothing wrong. The officer stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel, and approached her. His presence was intimidating, but she straightened her back, keeping her hands visible. She hoped this interaction would pass quickly, but tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. The officer demanded that she stop and answer questions. Her voice was steady, polite, but firm. She explained where she was going and what she was doing. Witnesses later would say she was calm and respectful, trying to diffuse the situation with words rather than actions. But the officer's mood did not lighten. Something inside him had already decided how this encounter would go. He saw her not as a person, not as a neighbor or a fellow human being, but as a threat in his mind. Bias, unchecked anger, and years of frustration clouded his judgment. A neighbor watching from their window could sense the growing tension. The woman tried to explain herself further, but the officer's tone became sharper, more demanding. The conversation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, voices raised, and the calm morning began to fracture. People started stepping outside, curious and worried, sensing that something was wrong. Phones came out of pockets, capturing the interaction because deep down, everyone knew that what was happening was serious. Suddenly, in a moment of panic or poor decision-making, the officer drew his weapon. There was a brief flash of movement, a scream, a moment frozen in horror. The woman fell to the ground, and the street that had been so quiet moments ago was now filled with chaos and disbelief. Neighbors shouted, people ran to help, and someone called emergency services immediately. The world seemed to stop for a few seconds, holding its breath in shock. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but by the time they reached her, it was too late. The woman had lost her life. Those who had witnessed the scene were in disbelief, some crying, some shaking, and some frozen, unable to process the tragedy. The officer stood there, perhaps realizing the gravity of his actions, but the damage had already been done. A life was gone, and the community was left to grapple with the sudden, devastating loss. The news spread like wildfire. Video clips from witnesses circulated on social media, showing pieces of what had happened, each clip more heartbreaking than the last. People across the city, and soon across the country, began reacting. Anger, grief, and confusion poured out online and in person. Community members organized immediate gatherings, holding vigils for the woman whose life had been cut short. People lit candles, left flowers, and shared stories of who she was, reminding everyone that she was more than a headline or a viral video. She was a daughter, a friend, a neighbor, a human being who had dreams and hopes. Journalists arrived at the scene, capturing the grief and the outrage. Interviews with neighbors revealed the fear that had long existed in the community, but now it had erupted into public attention. Social media posts documented every detail, spreading awareness and fueling discussions about police conduct, racial bias, and the urgent need for accountability. Each post, each video added to the weight of the story, making it impossible to ignore. The officer was taken into custody. He was silent in the back of the squad car, his thoughts his own as he faced the consequences of actions that could never be undone. The community, meanwhile, demanded answers. They wanted to know why this happened, how it happened, and who would take responsibility. Pain mixed with outrage as the neighborhood struggled to come to terms with the sudden tragic event. As the day turned into evening, the streets that had been filled with tension slowly emptied. Candles flickered in the growing darkness, and people whispered prayers and messages of hope. The tragedy had left a mark on the community, one that would not fade quickly. Families held their children closer, neighbors checked in on each other, and the local leaders began organizing ways to respond. It was clear that this incident would have long-lasting effects, not only on the community, but on the wider conversation about justice and equality. In homes across the city, people watched the news, replaying the videos, trying to make sense of what had happened. Friends called friends, family members consoled each other, and the sorrow spread, touching lives far beyond the neighborhood where it all began. The woman's story, her life, became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. People began to share memories of her, small acts of kindness she had shown, the moments she had made others laugh or smile. She became more than the victim of a horrific act. She became a reminder of what was at stake in the fight for justice. The officer's actions set off a chain reaction that would soon involve law enforcement oversight, media scrutiny, and public demonstrations. Questions were raised about training, about biases, and about accountability in positions of power. Each conversation, each debate, added fuel to the growing movement that sought justice not just for one woman, but for an entire community that had endured too many similar tragedies. Even as grief hung heavy in the air, there were glimpses of hope. Neighbors comforted one another, strangers offered support, and the community began to organize peaceful vigils and forums. The woman's family found solace in the shared mourning, knowing that their loss was recognized and honored by people who cared deeply. While nothing could bring her back, the collective response hinted at the possibility of change, of progress, and of a future where such incidents might be prevented. The day ended with a sense of quiet reflection. The streets were empty, the candles still burning, and the city settling into a somber night. The tragedy had shattered lives, but it had also awakened a community, forcing them to confront harsh truths and inspiring them to take action. The incident would be remembered not just for the loss, but for the courage, unity, and determination it inspired in those who refused to remain silent. The story of that morning had only begun, and its impact would ripple far beyond the boundaries of the small neighborhood where it all started. The day after the tragic shooting, the neighborhood was heavy with sorrow. People moved slowly, some still in shock, others talking quietly about what had happened. The streets seemed emptier than usual, and the usual chatter of children playing was replaced with hushed conversations about grief and anger. It was clear that the event had shaken everyone deeply. Families gathered in their homes, some comforting each other while others struggled to process the event alone. Neighbors shared their feelings, recounting their memories of the woman who had been killed. She had been kind, always ready to lend a hand or offer a smile. Everyone remembered her differently, but all agreed that her life had been far too short. These memories became a way to cope, a way to humanize the loss amidst the shocking headlines and viral videos. The video footage of the incident had spread rapidly on social media. Clips captured pieces of the confrontation, showing the woman's calm demeanor and the officer's aggression. It was enough to ignite outrage, not only locally but across the country. People began sharing the video with their own messages, some expressing grief, others calling for justice. Hashtags started trending, and people began organizing virtual and real-life gatherings to demand accountability. Local leaders and activists stepped forward to speak out. They organized community meetings, giving people a chance to share their feelings and thoughts. The meetings were emotional, with tears and raised voices. People wanted answers. They demanded to know why this had happened, and how those responsible would be held accountable. Each story shared added weight to the growing call for justice. Everyone felt that silence was no longer an option. Meanwhile, the authorities began investigating the case. Officers from outside the local department were brought in to ensure the investigation was unbiased. Evidence was collected meticulously: witness statements, phone videos, and surveillance footage from nearby buildings. Investigators reviewed everything, trying to piece together the sequence of events and understand how a routine encounter had ended in tragedy. The community watched closely, anxious for any signs that justice would be served. The media arrived in full force. Reporters spoke with neighbors, friends, and family members, capturing the human side of the story. Hay focused on the woman's life, her hopes, and her contributions to the community. They interviewed people who had known her for years, each story painting a picture of someone who was loved and respected. The coverage was intense, but it brought attention to the need for accountability and change. The Pentagon unexpectedly issued a statement about the incident. It was unusual for them to comment on a local police matter, but the severity of the case and its potential national implications had prompted a response. Their statement condemned the officers' actions and stressed that such behavior would not be tolerated. They emphasized the importance of fairness, justice, and reform within law enforcement. This brought a new level of attention and urgency to the situation. Public gatherings began forming outside the courthouse and city hall. People held signs, carried flowers, and chanted for justice. The energy was a mix of grief and determination. Mothers and fathers brought their children, explaining in simple terms why it was important to speak out against injustice. Young people carried banners chanting the woman's name, ensuring that her memory would not fade. These gatherings were peaceful but powerful, demonstrating the strength and unity of the community. Amid the protests, local authorities were forced to respond. Press conferences were held, where officials spoke about the investigation and promised transparency. Some officials expressed regret for the incident, while others reassured the public that accountability was a priority. The tension in the community remained high, but there was a sense of hope that the collective voices of the people would lead to change. As the days went on, the family of the woman became central figures in the story. They spoke publicly, sharing their grief and advocating for justice. Their courage inspired many, and they received support from communities across the nation. People sent letters, visited memorials, and participated in vigils. They shared messages of solidarity, making it clear that the woman's life had not been forgotten, and that her death would not be in vain. Community organizers also worked to ensure that the events remained peaceful. They guided protesters, reminded them of the importance of safety, and coordinated with local leaders to maintain order. Their efforts helped prevent the situation from escalating into violence, while still keeping the pressure on the authorities to act responsibly. Throughout all this, conversations about racial bias in law enforcement intensified. Experts were invited to talk on news channels, explaining how systemic racism can influence behavior and decisions. Scholars, activists, and former officers shared insights, highlighting the patterns that often go unnoticed until a tragedy occurs. These discussions were difficult but necessary, giving context to the raw emotions felt by the community. Local schools also addressed the incident. Teachers spoke with students about what had happened in age-appropriate ways, helping them understand grief, injustice, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Counselors were available to support students struggling with fear and confusion. This approach helped the younger generation process the event without feeling helpless, giving them tools to engage in meaningful conversations about justice and equality. In neighborhoods across the city, people took small actions to honor the woman's memory. Murals were painted, candles were lit, and flowers were placed at the site of the shooting. These gestures created spaces for reflection, grief, and community bonding. They were reminders that even in tragedy, people could come together to support each other and honor those lost. The investigation moved forward steadily. Forensic teams worked on evidence, legal experts analyzed the officers' past records, and federal authorities monitored the process closely. The seriousness of the case meant that it could not be handled lightly. Each detail mattered, from the exact positioning of the officer to the timing of his decisions. The goal was to ensure that justice would be thorough, fair, and untainted by bias. Meanwhile, media coverage highlighted other similar cases, creating a broader narrative about accountability in law enforcement. People began to connect the dots, seeing patterns and raising questions about systemic issues. This added momentum to the public outcry, pushing for legislative reforms and better training standards for officers. The woman's friends and family organized memorial services. These gatherings were emotional and raw, with people sharing memories, stories, and prayers. Community leaders spoke about the need for action, turning grief into motivation. The services provided a sense of closure for some, while reminding everyone of the ongoing work needed to prevent future tragedies. The social media campaigns continued to grow. Hashtags, posts, and videos kept the story alive, ensuring that the public remained informed and engaged. People from all walks of life contributed, sharing resources, organizing events, and offering support. The momentum created a network of activists and citizens united in their demand for justice. As the weeks passed, it became clear that the incident had sparked something larger than anyone had anticipated. The community, once quiet and overlooked, became a focal point for discussions about race, power, and accountability. Citizens realized that their voices could influence change, and they were determined to make sure that the woman's life mattered in the broader fight for justice. Even as anger and grief persisted, there was a sense of unity forming. People who had never met before came together for a common cause. Volunteers helped organize food and supplies for protesters, and local businesses supported the community with donations and safe spaces. The tragedy had brought out both sorrow and compassion, creating a powerful human story amidst the headlines. The story of that day, of the shooting, of the woman's life, became a symbol for a larger movement. People began documenting everything meticulously, ensuring that history would remember the event accurately. Writers, journalists, and activists worked to capture the truth, providing a voice for those who could not speak for themselves. While the pain was still fresh, hope began to grow. The community saw that their collective action could demand attention and inspire change. They realized that while they could not bring the woman back, they could fight for a world where such tragedies were less likely to occur. They could honor her memory through action, advocacy, and unity. In the evenings, the neighborhood remained quiet but alive with reflection. Lights in homes flickered as families spoke quietly, remembering her and planning how to move forward. Candles burned at memorial sites, reminding passers-by that the woman's life had mattered and would continue to inspire change. The investigation continued, but the community knew that justice was not just about legal proceedings. It was about raising awareness, demanding accountability, and creating a safer, fairer society. Through grief, anger, and hope, the story of that morning continued to unfold. The tragedy had left scars, but it had also awakened a community, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths and pushing them toward meaningful action. The woman's life, though tragically cut short, became a catalyst for conversation, change, and solidarity. Her story would live on, not only in memory but in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. The city was tense as the trial date for the officer approached. Months had passed since the tragic shooting, and the community had not forgotten. Daily life continued, but there was an underlying sense of anticipation and anxiety. People watched the news constantly, waiting for updates, hoping that the legal process would finally bring some measure of justice. The streets still carried memorials for the woman, and gatherings continued, keeping her memory alive. The courtroom became the center of attention. Every detail mattered, and people came from near and far to witness the proceedings. Friends, neighbors, and activists filled the seats, their eyes fixed on the proceedings. Families of victims of similar incidents joined in solidarity, lending their voices to the call for accountability. Reporters set up cameras and microphones, documenting every word, every reaction, so that the story would reach people who could not be present in the room. The prosecution began presenting their case. They detailed the officer's actions that day, supported by witness testimonies and video footage. Each piece of evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened, showing that the woman had done nothing to provoke violence. The prosecutors carefully explained the biases that had influenced the officer's decisions, highlighting how prejudice can escalate into life-threatening actions. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as the evidence was laid bare, showing the human cost of one officer's failure to uphold his duty. The defense argued their case as well. They suggested that the officer acted in fear and that the situation was complicated. However, the prosecution countered with clear evidence of the officer's history and behavior. Witnesses spoke about prior incidents where the officer had shown aggression and prejudice. Experts testified about the patterns of bias that often go unnoticed, explaining how small prejudices can grow into dangerous decisions. The courtroom listened intently, understanding that the stakes were higher than just one trial. They were about accountability, ethics, and trust in law enforcement. Family members of the woman took the stand. Their voices trembled as they described the loss and the impact it had on their lives. They spoke about her kindness, her hopes, and her dreams. Each word carried weight, reminding everyone present that this case was not abstract or distant, it was deeply personal. The room was filled with tears, and even those who had no connection to the woman felt the gravity of the loss. The public could see the human side of the tragedy, beyond the news reports and social media clips. Throughout the trial, the community stayed actively involved. They organized peaceful rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs and chanting messages of justice. Volunteers handed out food and water, making sure that people could participate without worrying about basic needs. Local leaders spoke to the crowd, reminding them of the importance of staying calm and respectful while still demanding accountability. The energy outside mirrored the intensity inside the courtroom, creating a sense of unity and purpose. Media coverage was relentless. Reporters interviewed experts, lawyers, and activists, providing in-depth analysis of the trial and the larger issues it highlighted. Social media users shared updates, videos, and personal reflections, keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. People debated the implications of the case, discussing systemic racism, police training, and the role of oversight. The woman's story became a symbol of broader struggles, inspiring discussions and advocacy beyond the courtroom. Legal experts explained the charges in simple terms for the public. They detailed how murder and civil rights violations were defined and how the evidence supported these charges. They emphasized the importance of following legal procedures, ensuring that the trial would be fair and that the outcome would be based on facts and evidence rather than emotion. The public paid close attention, understanding that the trial's fairness would set a precedent for similar cases in the future. The officer's demeanor in court was closely watched. Some people noted his silence, others his nervous movements. Observers speculated about his awareness of the consequences he faced. The prosecution highlighted his history and behavior, showing a pattern of misconduct that could not be ignored. Witnesses recounted the events of that day in detail, describing the officer's actions and the woman's calm responses. The contrast was stark and undeniable, reinforcing the case against him. Community leaders continued their work outside the courtroom. They organized workshops, discussions, and educational events to raise awareness about racial bias and police accountability. These efforts aimed to transform grief into action, helping people understand the importance of advocacy, civic engagement, and support for victims of injustice. The community's response demonstrated resilience, turning tragedy into a catalyst for learning and empowerment. The trial also brought attention to the mental health of those affected. Counselors were available for witnesses, family members, and community participants. People were encouraged to share their feelings, knowing that acknowledging grief and trauma was part of the healing process. This approach helped individuals cope with the intense emotions that the trial stirred, creating a supportive environment in the midst of a challenging legal process. As the days of testimony continued, each session brought new revelations. Evidence from forensic experts provided clarity on the sequence of events. Analysis of the officer's conduct showed that his actions were not random, but influenced by prejudice and bias. Witnesses described the woman's final moments, painting a picture of bravery and composure in the face of danger. The courtroom absorbed these details, understanding that the trial was not just about legal technicalities but about human lives and moral responsibility. The public followed the trial closely, discussing it in homes, workplaces, and online communities. People shared their interpretations, asked questions, and debated the implications. The case became a national conversation, sparking debates about policing, justice, and systemic issues. Advocates used the trial as an opportunity to push for reforms, presenting proposals for better training, oversight, and community engagement in law enforcement. The woman's story became a touchstone for a larger movement, showing how one tragedy could inspire widespread change. In the courtroom, tension was palpable. Every witness, every piece of evidence, every question mattered. Lawyers carefully crafted their arguments, ensuring that the facts were presented clearly and convincingly. The judge maintained order, guiding the proceedings with fairness and authority. The public watched closely, understanding that the outcome would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. Family members of the woman remained a central focus. Their courage in speaking out inspired many. They spoke about the impact of her death on their lives, their community, and their hopes for justice. Their words reminded everyone that the trial was about more than legal outcomes. It was about recognition, accountability, and the value of human life. The courtroom listened, the media reported, and the community stood in solidarity. Community organizers continued their efforts, ensuring that protests remained peaceful and constructive. They provided guidance, resources, and support to those who wanted to participate in advocacy. Their work emphasized that change required both passion and discipline, showing that communities could demand justice while maintaining order and respect. Experts in law enforcement and social justice provided testimony and commentary. They explained patterns of bias, the consequences of unchecked authority, and the importance of accountability. Their insights helped frame the trial within a larger context, showing how individual actions reflect broader systemic issues. The public gained a deeper understanding of the complexities involved, recognizing that justice required both legal and societal engagement. As the trial progressed, anticipation grew. People wondered what the outcome would be, how it would affect the community, and whether it would set a precedent for future cases. The courtroom became a space of intense focus, where human stories, legal principles, and moral questions intersected. Every day brought new information, new emotions, and new insights, keeping the public engaged and invested. Even as the trial continued, life outside the courthouse went on. Families struggled to maintain routines while processing grief. Schools addressed the event with students, helping them understand justice, empathy, and community responsibility. Local businesses supported ongoing advocacy efforts, providing spaces and resources for meetings, workshops, and memorials. The community's response was multifaceted, combining mourning, activism, and education. The trial also highlighted the power of storytelling. News reports, social media posts, and personal accounts kept the woman's memory alive. People shared stories about her kindness, her laughter, and her contributions to the community. These stories humanized the case, reminding everyone that justice was not just about punishment, but about honoring a life and learning from the tragedy. Throughout the trial, the public remained vigilant. They monitored proceedings, attended hearings, and participated in discussions. Their involvement ensured that the trial received attention and that the voices of those affected were heard. The community's engagement demonstrated that justice is not only a legal process, but a collective responsibility. As weeks turned into months, the courtroom became a place of intense reflection. Every detail mattered, every testimony carried weight, and every decision would shape the future. The woman's story continued to resonate, inspiring action, advocacy, and awareness. The trial was more than a legal process. It was a moment for society to confront difficult truths, demand accountability, and strive for a better future. By the time the testimony concluded, it was clear that the case had left an indelible mark. The courtroom had witnessed sorrow, courage, and determination. The community outside had shown resilience, solidarity, and commitment to justice. The media had amplified the story, ensuring that it reached people far and wide. The woman's life, though tragically cut short, had become a catalyst for change, education, and reflection. Her story would continue to inspire, reminding everyone of the importance of standing up for justice, empathy, and human dignity. The day of the verdict arrived, and the city seemed to hold its breath. News outlets broadcast live from the courthouse. Streets were filled with supporters and protesters alike, and inside the courtroom, tension was palpable. Every person present understood the weight of the moment. It was not just about the trial of a single officer, but about justice, accountability, and the broader message it would send to communities everywhere. People had waited months for this day, hoping that fairness would prevail and that the woman's life would be honored through truth. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was solemn. Family members of the woman sat together, holding hands, offering comfort to one another. Their faces were a mixture of anxiety and hope. Neighbors, friends, and community members filled the benches, many holding flowers or signs, their presence a testament to solidarity and grief. Reporters and camera crews were ready, documenting every moment for viewers who could not attend in person. Lawyers on both sides prepared for the reading of the verdict, reviewing notes and preparing for the inevitable reactions. The judge entered, and silence fell. Everyone stood in respect, the weight of anticipation hanging in the air. The judge began to read the verdict slowly, each word deliberate and heavy with consequence. The officer was found guilty on all charges, including murder and civil rights violations. The courtroom erupted with emotion. Some cried tears of relief, Others hugged tightly, and some simply sat in stunned silence, absorbing the reality of justice being served. The prosecution team looked relieved but focused. They had worked tirelessly to build a strong case, and the verdict validated their efforts. Their success was not just legal, it was moral, demonstrating that careful, persistent work could lead to accountability. The defense team appeared solemn, understanding the gravity of the verdict, while the officer himself showed a mixture of shock and resignation. The reality of his actions and their consequences had finally come to bear in the most definitive way. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate. The crowd, which had been tense and anxious, erupted in cheers, chants, and tears. People celebrated the victory for justice while remaining respectful of the woman's family, recognizing that their grief was still raw and profound. Community leaders addressed the gathering, praising the persistence of those who had advocated for truth and justice. They reminded everyone that while this was a moment of triumph, the broader work of creating a safer and fairer society was just beginning. Media coverage highlighted the verdict across the nation. Reporters interviewed the family, neighbors, and activists, giving them a platform to share their perspectives. The woman's life was remembered not only in terms of tragedy but in terms of impact. Stories about her kindness, her contributions, and the dreams she had pursued became central to the narrative. People connected with her humanity, realizing that her story was a reminder of the lives lost to injustice and the urgent need for change. The Pentagon, which had previously issued statements of concern, responded again. They emphasized the importance of accountability and condemned the officers' actions. Their response highlighted the seriousness of the case and the potential consequences of unchecked behavior. By publicly affirming their stance, they reinforced the message that such actions were unacceptable and that systemic reforms were necessary to prevent future tragedies. The sentencing phase followed the verdict. The judge considered the evidence, the gravity of the crime, and the need for justice. After careful deliberation, the officer was sentenced to death. The courtroom reacted with a mixture of relief and solemnity. Some saw it as a necessary consequence for an irreversible act, while others reflected on the complexities and debates surrounding capital punishment. Regardless, the decision underscored the seriousness of the crime and reinforced the principle that those in positions of authority must be held accountable for their actions. Family. Members of the woman spoke publicly after the sentencing. They expressed grief, sorrow, and gratitude for the support they had received throughout the trial. Their words resonated deeply with the community and beyond. They emphasized that their fight was not only about personal loss but about justice for all, advocating for systemic change to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Their courage inspired many and added a personal dimension to the legal and social ramifications of the case. Community response remained strong. Vigils continued, memorials were maintained, and efforts to raise awareness about racial bias and police accountability intensified. Local leaders and activists organized workshops, educational events, and discussions to help people understand the broader context of the tragedy. These initiatives aim to empower citizens, encourage civic engagement, and create a culture of accountability and empathy. The media continued to highlight systemic issues exposed by the case. Experts in law enforcement, social justice, and human rights discussed the implications of the verdict, analyzing patterns of bias, misconduct, and the need for reform. The public gained a deeper understanding of the complexities involved, seeing that justice required both individual accountability and systemic change. These discussions fostered awareness, education, and a collective call for progress. Schools incorporated lessons about the trial, focusing on civic responsibility, justice, and empathy. Teachers discussed the importance of understanding bias, advocating for fairness, and standing up against injustice. Students were encouraged to reflect, ask questions, and engage in dialogue. This educational approach helped younger generations comprehend the significance of the case and inspired them to contribute positively to society. Neighborhoods maintained memorials, murals, and public spaces honoring the woman's life. These efforts became a daily reminder of both loss and hope. People who had never met her still felt connected through these acts of remembrance. The memorial served as focal points for reflection, community engagement, and advocacy, keeping the story alive in public consciousness. Legal experts provided commentary on the significance of the verdict and sentence. They discussed how it could set a precedent for future cases, emphasizing the importance of transparency, accountability, and adherence to the law. Their insights helped the public understand the broader implications of the trial, reinforcing the need for vigilance, advocacy, and systemic reform. The case became a reference point for discussions on legal and ethical standards in law enforcement. The officers' past actions were also scrutinized, revealing patterns of misconduct and bias. Investigators highlighted previous complaints, demonstrating that the tragedy was not an isolated incident but part of a larger issue. This revelation fueled further discussions on the importance of monitoring, training, and reform within law enforcement agencies. The community recognized that vigilance was necessary to prevent recurrence and ensure public trust. Social media continued to play a significant role in spreading awareness and advocating for justice. Campaigns, posts, and videos reached audiences worldwide, highlighting the importance of public engagement in demanding accountability. People shared stories, resources, and reflections, creating a network of solidarity and activism. The woman's story became a symbol of resilience, justice, and the ongoing struggle against systemic inequality. Local businesses and organizations supported ongoing initiatives, providing resources, safe spaces, and encouragement for community activities. They collaborated with activists, leaders, and educators to promote awareness, empathy, and civic engagement. The collective efforts reinforced the message that justice was not only about legal outcomes, but also about societal responsibility, community solidarity, and the empowerment of citizens. The broader public engaged in discussions about racial bias, police conduct, and accountability. Panels, forums, and workshops provided platforms for dialogue and learning. People from different backgrounds shared experiences, perspectives, and ideas for reform. These conversations fostered understanding, empathy, and a commitment to change, demonstrating that collective awareness and action could address systemic issues effectively. Counselors and support groups provided resources for those affected by the tragedy, including family members, witnesses, and community participants. Emotional and psychological support helped individuals process grief, trauma, and fear. This holistic approach ensured that the community could heal while remaining engaged in advocacy and justice efforts. The sentencing also prompted reflection on broader societal responsibilities. Discussions about ethical behavior, the role of authority, and the consequences of unchecked power became central to public discourse. Community leaders, educators, and activists emphasized that change required vigilance, education, and sustained effort. The verdict and sentence served as catalysts for deeper understanding, engagement, and commitment to justice. As the days passed, the community continued to honor the woman's life through memorials, educational programs, and advocacy initiatives. Public gatherings, discussions, and workshops focused on empathy, awareness, and systemic reform. People recognized that while the tragedy was irreversible, its impact could inspire positive change and societal growth. The story of the woman became a touchstone for resilience, advocacy, and the pursuit of justice. The officer's sentence served as a warning and a lesson. It highlighted the consequences of bias, aggression, and abuse of authority. Law enforcement agencies took notice, reviewing policies, training, and oversight mechanisms. The case became a point of reflection for officers, leaders, and policymakers, emphasizing the importance of ethical conduct, accountability, and public trust. The community, media, and public continued to engage in dialogue, advocacy, and education. They shared resources, organized events, and maintained memorials, ensuring that the woman's story remained central to ongoing efforts for justice. Her life, though tragically lost, became a catalyst for awareness, reform, and collective action, demonstrating the power of resilience and the enduring importance of human dignity. Through grief, reflection, and determination, the story of the woman continued to inspire. The verdict and sentence were significant milestones, but the ongoing work of advocacy, education, and community engagement remained crucial. Her life, her death, and the pursuit of justice became a testament to the power of human solidarity, ethical responsibility, and the unwavering commitment to a fairer, safer society. The community, though scarred, remained united, resilient, and determined to ensure that her legacy would endure and inspire change for generations to come. After the sentencing, Life in the neighborhood slowly began to shift. The immediate shock and grief were still present, but there was a growing sense of purpose among the people. They had witnessed justice being served, yet they knew that real change required ongoing effort. Memorials and vigils continued, keeping the memory of the woman alive, while initiatives to improve community safety and accountability gained momentum. Families and friends who had been closest to the woman worked tirelessly to honor her life. They set up scholarships in her name, supporting young people in the community who were pursuing education and dreams she had once encouraged. Community centers hosted programs about empathy, justice, and civic engagement, teaching lessons inspired by her life and legacy. These initiatives turned sorrow into action, showing that grief could lead to growth and positive change. Activists and community leaders continued to organize events and discussions. Workshops on racial bias, police accountability, and community engagement became common. People from different backgrounds came together, sharing experiences and ideas, learning from one another. The goal was not only to remember the woman, but to ensure that the tragedy led to long-lasting improvements in society. Her story became a catalyst for education and reform, inspiring both young and old to take action. Local law enforcement agencies took notice of the public demand for change. Training programs were reviewed and revised, emphasizing ethical conduct, empathy, and accountability. Policies were strengthened to prevent misconduct and bias. Officers were encouraged to engage with the community, learning from citizens and building trust. These reforms, while gradual, were a direct response to the tragedy and demonstrated that collective voices could influence institutions. Schools incorporated lessons about justice and fairness, helping students understand the importance of equality and civic responsibility. Teachers guided discussions about bias, empathy, and the role of law enforcement in society. Students participated in community projects, creating artwork, essays, and presentations inspired by the woman's life. Education became a tool for empowerment, shaping the next generation to value justice, fairness, and human dignity. The media continued to cover the story, highlighting the woman's life, the trial, and the community's response. Stories about her kindness, courage, and contributions inspired viewers nationwide. Journalists explored the broader social issues exposed by the case, including racial bias, systemic inequality, and the need for reform. Public conversations remained active, fostering awareness, empathy, and advocacy. Community gatherings became a regular part of life. Vigils, discussions, and volunteer projects brought people together, reinforcing solidarity and purpose. These events honored the woman's memory while promoting education, justice, and civic engagement. People found strength in each other, realizing that collective action could create lasting impact. Local businesses and organizations played a role in supporting these efforts. They provided spaces for meetings, sponsored educational programs, and contributed resources for memorials and community projects. Their involvement demonstrated that change required collaboration across all sectors of society. Together, citizens, organizations, and institutions worked to ensure that the woman's legacy was honored through meaningful action. Legal reforms were discussed at city and state levels. Lawmakers and policymakers analyzed the trial and its outcomes, considering changes to training, oversight, and accountability in law enforcement. The woman's story became a reference point, influencing policy discussions and decisions. Her life, tragically cut short, had sparked conversations that could lead to systemic improvements. The officer's sentence and the trial's outcome were studied by legal experts and scholars. They highlighted the importance of transparency, fairness, and accountability in the justice system. The case was cited in discussions about ethical conduct, the responsibilities of those in authority, and the consequences of bias and misconduct. By examining the events carefully, society aimed to prevent similar tragedies and reinforce the values of justice and human dignity. Memorials continued to grow. Murals, plaques, and public spaces were dedicated to the woman, each one telling a story of courage, kindness, and community. These spaces became places for reflection, education, and gathering. Visitors learned about her life, the events that led to her death, and the efforts to create change in her honor. The memorials served as both remembrance and inspiration, connecting the past with ongoing action. Social media remained a platform for advocacy and remembrance. People shared stories, updates on reforms, and educational resources. Campaigns highlighted issues of bias, misconduct, and accountability, encouraging citizens to engage and advocate. The woman's story continued to inspire action, creating a network of awareness and activism that extended beyond the local community. Community support systems developed further. Counseling services, support groups, and mentorship programs helped individuals affected by the tragedy. People found comfort in shared experiences, learning coping strategies, and participating in initiatives aimed at prevention and reform. The holistic approach addressed emotional, social, and educational needs, ensuring that the community could heal while moving forward constructively. The broader public engaged in discussions about fairness, justice, and systemic reform. Forums, panels, and workshops allowed citizens to contribute ideas, ask questions, and collaborate on solutions. These conversations fostered understanding, empathy, and commitment to change. The woman's story became a focal point for learning, advocacy, and societal growth. Educational institutions continued to honor her legacy. Schools, colleges, and universities integrated lessons about justice, civic responsibility, and human dignity into their curricula. Students participated in projects inspired by her life, promoting awareness and engagement. Education became a vehicle for long-term change, shaping the values and actions of future generations. The neighborhood itself transformed. Streets that had once been silent and tense became spaces of reflection, remembrance, and community engagement. Public art, memorials, and educational spaces fostered awareness and connection. Residents felt a sense of responsibility to maintain these spaces and ensure that the lessons learned from the tragedy remained present in daily life. Legal and policy reforms began to take shape. Law enforcement agencies implemented stronger oversight, clear accountability mechanisms, and enhanced training programs. Policies emphasized ethical behavior, empathy, and community engagement. These changes reflected the lessons learned from the tragedy and the ongoing commitment of the community to prevent similar events in the future. Community leaders continued to organize events that combined remembrance with action. Workshops, lectures, and volunteer initiatives allowed residents to engage actively in creating positive change. People of all ages participated, contributing their skills, ideas, and energy to initiatives inspired by the woman's life. The community's resilience and dedication demonstrated the power of collective action. Families and friends found solace in ongoing engagement. Participating in advocacy, education, and community building helped them process grief while honoring the woman's memory. They shared her story widely, ensuring that her life and legacy continued to inspire change. Their efforts demonstrated that personal loss could be transformed into meaningful action, benefiting the broader society. Public awareness campaigns highlighted the importance of empathy, fairness, and justice. Messages emphasized that every individual has a role in promoting ethical behavior, standing up against injustice, and supporting community well-being. The woman's story became central to these campaigns, providing a relatable and compelling example of the consequences of bias and misconduct. The neighborhood saw a gradual, positive transformation. Residents became more engaged, aware, and committed to justice. Community events, educational initiatives, and public memorials fostered solidarity and empathy. People felt empowered to participate in shaping their society, ensuring that tragedies like this would be met with action, reflection, and prevention. The media continued to follow the long-term effects of the case. Stories highlighted community initiatives, legal reforms, and educational programs inspired by the woman's life. The coverage reinforced the importance of awareness, accountability, and collective action, ensuring that her story remained a source of inspiration and learning. Through all these efforts, the woman's legacy grew stronger. Her life, though tragically cut short, became a symbol of resilience, justice, and human dignity. The community's dedication to remembrance, advocacy, and reform demonstrated that tragedy could inspire positive change. Her story continued to influence policies, education, and societal awareness, creating a lasting impact far beyond the immediate neighborhood. Years later, people would look back on the events and remember both the sorrow and the transformation. The tragedy had left scars, but it had also sparked action, reflection, and growth. The community remained united, resilient, and committed to ensuring that her life and legacy would continue to inspire justice, empathy, and positive change. Her story became a testament to the enduring power of human solidarity, ethical responsibility, and the pursuit of a fairer society for all.